The morning sky over New Seoul burned crimson as three massive Korvac warships descended through the clouds like steel mountains. Their hulls gleamed with an unnatural blue-black metal that seemed to drink in the light, and the sound they made was like thunder that never stopped rolling. Children playing in the street stopped their games and stared upward with wide eyes, not yet understanding that their childhood was about to end forever. Kim Dae-ho pressed his face against the small window of his family's apartment, watching the ships settle into landing formations around the city's central plaza. At 10 years old, he had heard the whispered stories from adults when they thought children weren't listening. Stories about other worlds, other colonies that had received visits from ships just like these. Stories that always ended the same. "Wei, get away from there," his mother, Lee So-young, called softly from across the room. Her voice carried that particular tremor that meant she was trying very hard not to cry. "Come help me pack your father's medical supplies." Dae-ho's father, Kim Jae-min, worked as a doctor in the colony's main hospital. For the past 3 days, ever since the long-range sensors had detected the approaching fleet, he had been treating people who came to him with stress-induced illnesses. Panic attacks and requests for sleeping pills, strong enough to make the coming nightmare disappear. But there were no pills strong enough for what was coming. The Korvac had perfected their system over 3,000 years of conquest. They didn't need to destroy worlds or massacre populations. Fear was a much more efficient tool than fire. They would arrive, demonstrate their overwhelming power, then make their simple demand: give us your best and brightest children, and the rest of you can continue your small lives in peace. Most species, faced with the choice between losing some children or losing everything, made the logical choice. But the Korvac had never encountered humans before. The first landing craft touched down in the plaza with a hiss of compressed air and the whine of alien engines. The craft itself looked like a giant metallic insect, all angles and gleaming surfaces, with legs that extended to grip the ground like claws. From its belly emerged soldiers that made the watching humans gasp in fear. The Korvac stood 7 feet tall, with lean bodies covered in what looked like living armor that shifted and rippled like oil on water. Their faces were hidden behind helmets that resembled the skulls of predatory birds, with glowing red eye slits that seemed to see everything. They moved with the fluid grace of born killers, weapons held casually but ready. General Vexrim stepped from the command craft last, his armor more elaborate than the others, decorated with small bones and metal fragments that told the story of 1,000 conquered worlds. He had overseen collection operations on 47 different planets, and everyone had followed the same predictable pattern. The locals would resist briefly, then submit when they realized the hopelessness of their situation. "Citizens of New Seoul," his voice boomed from speakers mounted on the landing craft, translated instantly into Korean by Korvac computers that had been analyzing human communications for months. "Your world is now under the protection of the Korvac Empire. We require tribute to ensure your continued prosperity." The plaza filled with colonists who came reluctantly, knowing they had no choice but to listen. Parents held their children close, as if love alone could protect them from what was coming. Some wept openly. Others stood in silent defiance that would accomplish nothing. "We require 50 of your most promising young ones," Vexrim continued, his red eye slits scanning the crowd with mechanical precision. Children between the ages of 8 and 14, selected for intelligence, creativity, and potential. They will be taken to our educational facilities, where they will learn to serve the greater good of the galaxy. Educational facilities. Even the translation computers couldn't quite hide the lie in those words. The selection process began immediately. Korvac soldiers moved through the crowd with handheld scanners that analyzed brain patterns, genetic markers, and psychological profiles. Children who showed high intelligence, artistic ability, or leadership potential were marked for collection. The scanners never made mistakes. Dae-ho had hidden in his family's apartment for 3 days, but the scanners found him anyway. 2 soldiers smashed through the door with casual violence, their weapons sweeping the small rooms, until the red targeting beam settled on the boy crouched behind his mother's chair. "High compatibility rating," one soldier reported in the clicking. Harsh language of the Korvac. "Exceptional pattern recognition and problem-solving abilities. This one will adapt well to conditioning." Jae-min stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Please, he's just a child. Take me instead. I'm a doctor. I have skills you could use." The lead soldier didn't even look at him. Adults are too set in their patterns. Children learn properly. So Young threw herself between the soldiers and her son, her arms spread wide as if she could shield him with nothing but maternal love. "You can't have him. I won't let you take my baby." The soldier's response was swift and brutal. A single strike with the butt of his weapon sent her crashing to the floor, blood streaming from her nose. But even as Jae-min knelt beside his unconscious wife, she managed to whisper the words that would echo in Dae-ho's mind for years to come. "Remember who you are." The soldiers dragged the boy away as he screamed for his parents, his small fists beating uselessly against armor that could withstand plasma cannons. General Vexrim watched from the plaza as his troops loaded 50 terrified children into the holding compartments of the transport craft. Just another successful collection, another batch of young minds to be broken and reshaped into tools of the Empire. As the ships lifted off into the crimson sky, leaving New Seoul in stunned silence, Vexrim made a note in his personal log. Human. Collection complete. Standard conditioning protocols should achieve full compliance within 6 months. He had no way of knowing that he had just made the greatest mistake in the 3,000-year history of the Korvac Empire. The Korvac conditioning facility floated in the dead space between two dying stars, a massive structure of black metal, and glowing conduits that looked like a mechanical spider, spinning webs of despair. Inside its countless chambers, the screams of broken children had echoed for centuries, each one marking another victory for the Empire's twisted system of control. Cell Block 7 housed the newest arrivals, including the batch of human children taken from New Seoul 2 years ago. Most of the other species had already surrendered their identities by now. The blue-skinned Zalari twins no longer spoke their native language, responding only to Korvac commands. The young Thraxian with the crystalline scales had stopped asking about his homeworld entirely. Even the fierce Kandorian child, whose people were known throughout the galaxy for their warrior spirit, now flinched whenever a guard approached. But Kim Dae-ho was different. Every morning at 600 ship time, the cell doors would iris open with a mechanical hiss, and the children would shuffle out for their daily conditioning session. While the others moved like walking corpses, eyes downcast and spirits crushed, Dae-ho walked with his head up. Not in defiance that would bring punishment, but with a quiet awareness that drove his captors to distraction. The conditioning chambers were designed to break minds with surgical precision. Prisoners were strapped into neural interface chairs that could manipulate emotions, implant false memories, and slowly erase everything that made them who they were. The sessions began with mild discomfort and gradually escalated to psychological torture that would reduce most beings to whimpering shells within weeks. Dr. Ketval, the facility's chief conditioning specialist, had perfected his techniques. Over 2 centuries of practice, his elongated skull was covered in cybernetic implants that let him monitor his subjects' brain patterns in real time, adjusting the neural feedback to achieve maximum psychological damage with minimum permanent harm. Broken minds could still be useful, but destroyed ones were worthless. Subject 847H shows continued resistance to standard protocols, he dictated to his floating recording drone as he reviewed Dae-ho's latest session data. Neural pathways remain intact despite prolonged exposure to fear response conditioning. Memory suppression algorithms have failed to achieve desired effect. What frustrated Ketval most was that the human child never fought back in ways that justified harsher measures. During the sessions, Dae-ho would endure the mental assault in silence, his vital signs showing pain and stress, but never the complete breakdown that marked successful conditioning. Afterward, he would be returned to his cell, where he would sit quietly for exactly 10 minutes, as if processing what had happened, then begin his real rebellion. The rebellion came in whispers. While the guards made their rounds through the dimly lit cell block, Dae-ho would move quietly from cell to cell, speaking in hushed tones to the other prisoners. He told them stories about Earth, about blue skies and green grass and oceans that stretched beyond the horizon. He described snow falling on mountain peaks and the way cherry blossoms bloomed in spring in his grandmother's garden in Seoul. He talked about freedom, about families that loved unconditionally, about a world where children played without fear. "Mother used to make kimchi jjigae on cold days," he whispered to Zixara, a young Nilari whose tentacle-like appendages had stopped glowing months ago as her spirit died. "The smell would fill our whole apartment, and my father would complain that it was too spicy, but he always ate 3 bowls anyway." The stories worked like medicine on wounds that the Korvac couldn't even see. Slowly, carefully, Daiho was rebuilding what the conditioning sessions tore down. When the Thraxian child, Velcros, began having nightmares about his homeworld being destroyed, Daiho would tell him about the strength of crystal formations, how they grew more beautiful under pressure. When the Zalari twins forgot how to smile, he taught them Earth jokes that made them giggle despite themselves. The facility's automated systems recorded these interactions, but the Korvac couldn't understand their significance. To them, the whispered conversations looked like harmless social bonding, the kind of behavior they actually encouraged between broken subjects. What they didn't realize was that Daiho was doing something no other prisoner had ever managed. He was building hope in a place designed to destroy it. But Daiho wasn't just helping others. Every day brought new lessons about his captors, and he absorbed each one with the focused intensity of a child who had learned that knowledge was survival. He noticed that the guards always checked cell block 7 at 23-minute intervals, never varying their routine. He observed that Dr. Ketval's cybernetic implants sparked slightly when he was frustrated, suggesting they weren't perfectly calibrated. He memorized the layout of the facility from glimpses caught during transport to conditioning sessions. Most importantly, he learned about Korvac psychology. They were predators who relied on fear and submission, but they had grown complacent. After centuries of easy victories, they expected their victims to break according to predictable patterns, and when those patterns failed, they became confused and made mistakes. During one particularly brutal conditioning session, as neural feedback crashed through his mind like burning waves, Daiho made a discovery that changed everything. The pain was designed to create specific responses, but if he could control his reactions, he could make the machines think the conditioning was working while keeping his true thoughts hidden. He began to experiment, letting his body show signs of submission while his mind remained free. He learned to fake the micro-expressions and neural patterns that indicated a breaking spirit. To the monitoring systems, he appeared to be slowly surrendering, but inside, he was building something the Korvac had never encountered before: a plan. The other children began to change too, but so subtly that their captors didn't notice. Velcros started scratching mathematical equations into his cell wall, calculations that would have made Korvac engineers nervous if they had bothered to translate them. The Zalari twins developed a complex sign language that looked like nervous tics but was actually a sophisticated communication system. Even the Kandorian child began moving with purpose again, his warrior training reasserting itself in careful hidden ways. Dr. Ketval's reports grew more frustrated with each passing week. The human continues to show anomalous responses. Standard, breaking protocols appear to be having minimal effect. Request permission to escalate to enhanced conditioning measures, but his requests were denied. The facility's administrator, General Noxrim, believed that patience was key to proper conditioning. "Let the process work," he commanded. "All subjects break eventually. The human will be no different." As Daiho lay in his narrow bunk that night, listening to the hum of the facility's life support systems and the quiet breathing of his fellow prisoners, he smiled for the first time in 2 years. Not because he was happy, but because he finally understood something crucial about his enemy. The Korvac had made a fundamental mistake. They thought that breaking a human child would be the same as breaking any other species. They had no idea that humans were the only species in the galaxy who got stronger when they were pushed to their limits. They didn't understand that taking away everything from a human didn't make them surrender. It made them dangerous. And Kim Daiho was about to become the most dangerous thing the Korvac Empire had ever created. 6 years had passed since the transport. Ships had first brought terrified children to the conditioning facility, and Kim Daiho had grown into something the Korvac had never seen before. At 16, he stood nearly as tall as the guards, his shoulders broad from the physical labor. They forced prisoners to perform. But it wasn't his size that made the other captives look to him with hope in their eyes. It was the fire that still burned inside him, a flame that 6 years of torture had only made brighter. The facility now held over 300 prisoners from dozens of worlds, but Cell Block 7 had become different from the others. While prisoners in other sections moved like broken dolls, going through the motions of existence without purpose, the children in Daeho's block walked with purpose. They had learned to hide their growing strength behind masks of submission, but among themselves, they were becoming something powerful. Velocros, the young Thraxian, who had once cowered in his cell, now helped organize food distribution with mathematical precision. His crystalline scales had begun to glow again, a sign that his people's natural abilities were returning. The Zalari twins, Kixra and Nixra, had developed their sign language into a communication network that spanned the entire facility. Even the Kandorian warrior child, Thokmar, had stopped flinching and started moving with the deadly grace his species was famous for. But the most remarkable change was in the newer arrivals. Children who might have broken within days of arrival now found strength in the stories Daeho shared with them. He told them about his parents, about Earth, about the idea that every being in the universe deserved to be free. More importantly, he taught them that strength didn't come from weapons or power, but from refusing to let others decide who you were. Dr. Ketval had long since given up trying to understand what was happening in Cell Block 7. His reports to the facility commander had become increasingly desperate as traditional conditioning methods continued to fail. The human subject has created some form of resistance network, he reported during the weekly staff meeting. His influence is spreading to other prisoners, reducing overall conditioning effectiveness by 37%. General Noxrim, the facility's commanding officer, stood before the massive viewing window of his office, watching the prisoners work in the facility's manufacturing sector below. His forearms moved with practiced efficiency as he reviewed data reports on holographic displays, each one showing declining success rates across all conditioning programs. Perhaps it's time to make an example, he mused, his mandibles clicking together in thought. Public execution of the ringleader should restore proper fear levels among the remaining subjects. But Ketval shook his elongated head. The human has become too valuable for termination. His psychological profile suggests he could be useful for a different purpose. The High Command has been requesting propaganda materials to demoralize human resistance movements in the outer colonies. The idea was perfect in its simplicity. Rather than break the human child completely, they would use his natural leadership abilities for their own purposes. Force him to record surrender messages that would be broadcast to human rebel cells throughout the galaxy. His voice, speaking words of defeat and submission, would accomplish more than 1,000 military victories. The recording session was scheduled for the following day in the facility's main broadcast chamber, a sterile room filled with holographic projectors and quantum communication arrays that could transmit messages across vast distances in real time. Daeho was brought in wearing neural restraints that would prevent any attempt at resistance, his wrists bound with energy shackles that could deliver paralyzing shocks at the touch of a button. General Noxrim stood behind the recording equipment, his four eyes focused on the human with predatory intensity. "For you will read the prepared statement exactly as written," he commanded, his translator rendering his clicks and hisses into perfect Korean. "Any deviation will result in immediate punishment for every prisoner in Cell Block 7. The threat was real and Daeho knew it. The Korvac had demonstrated their willingness to hurt innocents to maintain control countless times before. He looked at the holographic script floating in front of him, words designed to crush the spirit of every human still fighting for freedom across the galaxy. "I am Kim Daeho, formerly of the human colony New Soul," the script began. "I speak to my fellow humans to tell you that resistance is futile. The Korvac Empire is too powerful, too advanced for primitive species like ours to challenge. I have learned to accept their superiority, and I urge you to lay down your weapons and submit to their wisdom." The words tasted like poison in his mouth, but Daeho began to speak. His voice was steady, clear, carrying the authority that 6 years of leadership had given him. But as he spoke, something extraordinary happened. The neural restraints, designed to prevent coordinated thought, began to malfunction. Sparks flew from the control nodes as Daeho's brain patterns overwhelmed the system's capacity. Dr. Ketval frantically adjusted controls, trying to regain stability, but the human's neural activity was unlike anything in the Korvac databases. Where other species showed predictable brainwave patterns, Daeho's mind was a storm of interconnected thoughts, emotions, and memories that refused to be contained. In that moment of system failure, Daeho made his choice. He looked directly into the recording devices, his eyes blazing with the fire that 6 years of captivity had only made stronger, and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy. "My name is Kim Daeho of Earth," he said, his voice carrying the weight of every story he had told, every hope he had kindled, every moment of strength he had shared with his fellow prisoners. "We are not broken, we will never kneel, and we are coming home." The transmission went out before anyone could stop it. Quantum communication arrays designed to carry messages of surrender instead broadcast a declaration of defiance that traveled faster than light to every corner of Korvac space. In hidden bunkers on occupied worlds, resistance fighters heard a human child's voice speaking words they had almost forgotten how to believe. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, where human slaves had toiled in darkness for 3 years, work. Supervisors watched in amazement as their prisoners suddenly stood straighter, their eyes filled with new purpose. In the factory ships orbiting Proxima Centauri, human workers began to whisper among themselves for the first time since their capture. But the message didn't stop with humans. The Thraxian underground movement on their conquered homeworld received the transmission and began coordinating with human rebels for the first time. Zalari freedom fighters, who had been scattered and demoralized for decades, found new inspiration in the words of a child who refused to surrender. Even the proud Kandorian warriors, whose code of honor had seemed broken by defeat, began to remember what they had once fought for. General Noxrim stared at the communication arrays in horror as reports flooded in from across the Empire. Prisoner uprisings were breaking out on 17 different worlds. Slave labor productivity was dropping as workers began acts of sabotage. Most terrifying of all, species that had been enemies for millennia were starting to work together, united by the message of a single human child. "Shut down all communications," he ordered, but it was too late. The message had been recorded and retransmitted by rebel networks, spreading like wildfire through the galaxy's hidden channels. Within hours, every resistance cell, every freedom fighter, every enslaved being who still dreamed of liberation had heard the words that changed everything. Dr. Ketval stood frozen in shock, his instrument still sparking from the neural feedback overload. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "The restraints should have prevented any coordinated speech patterns." Daeho smiled as the guards rushed forward to subdue him, their energy weapons raised and ready to fire. The neural shackles sent waves of pain through his body, but he barely felt them. For the first time in 6 years he had spoken freely, and his words had reached across the darkness to touch every soul still fighting for freedom. "You made one mistake," he told General Noxrim as the guards dragged him toward the punishment cells. "You thought that breaking us would make us weak. But humans don't break the same way other species do. We get stronger." As the cell door sealed, behind him, Daeho could hear something that hadn't been heard in the facility for years. In Cell Block 7, in the manufacturing sectors, in the guard towers themselves, beings were singing. Not the broken wails of the defeated, but songs of hope, songs of home, songs that reminded them all of who they had been before the Korvac tried to make them forget. The first spark had been lit, and across the galaxy, the flames of rebellion were beginning to burn. The escape from the conditioning facility had been surprisingly easy once Daeho understood the Korvac's greatest weakness. They had grown lazy from centuries of easy victories. Their security systems were designed to keep broken prisoners inside, not to stop determined fighters from breaking out. When the facility's power grid mysteriously failed during a routine maintenance cycle, and the emergency lockdown protocols somehow malfunctioned at exactly the same moment, the guards found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. 300 prisoners, working together with military precision, moving through the corridors like a single organism with a shared purpose. Velcros had calculated the optimal escape routes, while the Zalari twins coordinated communications throughout the facility. Thokmar led the assault teams that neutralized guard posts with brutal efficiency. But it was Deho who held them all together, his voice cutting through the chaos as he guided them toward the shuttle bays. The stolen Korvac transport ship broke atmosphere just as reinforcement fleets arrived from the nearest military base. But the rebels had anticipated this too. Hidden among the facility's maintenance staff were sleeper agents who had been waiting for this moment for years, and the base's own defense systems turned against the Korvac vessels in a display of sabotage that left their commanders stunned and helpless. Within hours of the escape, similar uprisings erupted across 17 different worlds. The coordination was impossible, the timing too perfect to be coincidence. Intelligence reports flooded into Korvac High Command, each one more disturbing than the last. On the mining colony of Vega Prime, human slaves had somehow gained access to industrial explosives and brought down 3 major extraction facilities. The factory ships around Wolf 359 had gone silent after their human workforce seized control of the orbital platforms. But the most shocking revelation came from Admiral Jextar, commander of the Third Fleet, as his ships arrived at what should have been the smoldering ruins of the human homeworld. Earth hung in space exactly as it had for the past decade, apparently peaceful and defenseless. The same automated distress beacons still broadcast their pathetic pleas for mercy. The same debris fields from the destroyed human fleet still drifted in their calculated orbits. "Execute bombardment protocol," Gextar ordered, his forearms moving across the weapons control systems. "End this rebellion by eliminating their source of inspiration." But as the fleet's massive plasma cannons powered up, space around Earth suddenly came alive with activity. Asteroids that had drifted in the same patterns for years revealed themselves as camouflaged battleships. The debris fields reassembled into functioning vessels with engines that burned brighter than stars. Even Earth's moon opened like a flower, revealing the largest military installation ever constructed by any species in known galactic history. Admiral Park Min-jun's voice cut across all communication frequencies, transmitted from the bridge of a dreadnought that was larger than most Korvac space stations. His weathered face filled every screen in the Third Fleet, and his words carried the weight of decades of careful planning. "This is Admiral Park Min-jun of the Earth Defense Force," he announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "For 10 years you believed you had broken us. You thought our surrender was real, our defeat complete. You were wrong, we never surrendered, we were waiting." The revelation hit the Korvac fleet like a physical blow. The human surrender had been a deception on a scale beyond their comprehension. While they celebrated their victory and moved on to conquer other worlds, humanity had been building, planning, growing stronger. The scattered survivors of their initial attack had used the time to construct a military force that now surrounded the Third Fleet like a closing fist. But the humans didn't attack immediately. Instead, they broadcast something that terrified the Korvac more than any weapon could have: the truth. Every atrocity committed by the Empire over the past 3 millennia was transmitted across the galaxy on frequencies that reached every populated world. The conditioning facilities, the slave labor camps, the systematic destruction of entire cultures, all of it exposed to the light of day. On Korvac-controlled worlds, subject species that had lived in fear for generations suddenly realized they weren't alone. The Thraxian resistance cells that had operated in isolation for decades discovered they were part of a galaxy-wide network of freedom fighters. Zalari colonies that had never dared to dream of independence began coordinating with human tactical advisors who seemed to appear from nowhere. The psychological warfare was devastating. The Korvac had built their empire on the premise that resistance was futile, that their victims were too weak and divided to pose any real threat. Now they discovered that their enemies had been planning and preparing for years, that every act of cruelty had been documented and would be answered. Deho stood on the bridge of the stolen transport ship, now retrofitted with human technology and crewed by the escaped prisoners who had become his most trusted advisors. Through the view screen, He could see the Korvac Third Fleet trapped between Earth's hidden defenses and the approaching human battle group. But victory in this single engagement wasn't enough. He had learned too much about the Empire's structure to believe that defeating one fleet would end their reign of terror. "Open a channel to all Korvac vessels," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority that 6 years of leadership had given him. When the connection was established, he spoke words that reached not just the trapped fleet, but every Korvac military installation in the galaxy. "I am Kim Dae-ho of Earth," he began, and across dozens of worlds, Korvac commanders felt a chill of recognition at the name. "6 years ago, you took me from my family. You tried to break my spirit, to make me forget who I was. You failed. Not only did you fail to break me, you taught me everything I needed to know to destroy you." The words hung in space like a challenge that couldn't be ignored. In the conditioning facility where Dae-ho had learned to resist, Dr. Ketval watched the transmission with growing horror as he realized what his experiments had actually accomplished. General Noxrim stood before his command displays, watching as rebellion spread like a virus through every system the Empire controlled. "You built your power on fear," Dae-ho continued, his image now broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. "You thought that making others afraid would make you strong. But fear is a weapon that cuts both ways, and now for the first time in 3,000 years, you're the ones who should be afraid." The human fleets began to move, not with the desperate fury of cornered animals, but with the calculated precision of predators who had been hunting their prey for years. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical maneuver had been planned and practiced in secret facilities throughout the galaxy. The Korvac discovered that their former victims had become something far more dangerous than rebels or revolutionaries. They had become an army. As the first exchange of fire lit up the space around Earth, similar battles erupted across 17 star systems simultaneously. The rebellion that had started with a single child's refusal to surrender had become a coordinated military campaign that threatened the very foundations of the Korvac Empire. And in the hidden command centers scattered throughout human space, Admiral Park Min-jun and his staff watched the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. The storm they had been building for a decade was finally breaking, and the thunder of its fury would be heard across the galaxy. The age of Korvac dominance was ending, and the age of human defiance had begun. The massive Korvac warship hung in space like a dark metal mountain, its surface covered in weapon ports that could destroy entire cities. But inside the command bridge, something impossible was happening. The alien warriors who had conquered 1,000 worlds were backing away from their control panels, their 6 arms trembling. On the main screen, a single small human transport ship drifted toward them. No weapons, no shields, just one man who had requested to speak with their High Council. "This is madness," hissed Commander Vex, his snake-like head weaving nervously. "One human thinks he can face the Council. We should vaporize his ship now." But Fleet Admiral Korth raised a clawed hand. Something about this felt different. For 3 years, they had been losing battles they should have won easily. Human colonies, that should have surrendered instead, fought with desperate courage. Their own soldiers were beginning to whisper that humans couldn't be broken. "Let him come," Korth decided. "I want to see what makes these creatures so stubborn." The transport ship docked with barely a sound. Through the airlock walked Kim Dae-ho, wearing nothing but simple clothes and carrying no weapons. The Korvac guards towered over him, their armor gleaming, plasma rifles ready. But Dae-ho walked between them like he was strolling through a park. The council chamber was designed to terrify. Massive pillars stretched up into darkness. The 5 High Council members sat on thrones that looked like they were carved from black stone, each one 15 feet tall with eyes that glowed red in the dim light. Behind them, holographic displays showed the vast Korvac fleet, thousands of ships ready to burn human worlds. Dae-ho stood in the center of the chamber, looking impossibly small. But when he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the vast space. "I'm here to accept your surrender." The silence stretched for long seconds. Then High Councilor Wrath began to laugh, a sound like grinding metal. "Surrender? Human child, do you see our fleet? We have conquered species across 50 galaxies. We are eternal. We are inevitable. You're afraid, Daiho said simply. The laughter stopped. What did you just say? Vrath's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You heard me. You're terrified. That's why you're sitting in chairs that make you look bigger. That's why you keep the lights dim. That's why you brought an entire fleet to face one unarmed human. Daiho took a step forward. You know you're already beaten. Councillor Zek slammed a massive fist on his throne. We rule 800 worlds. Our armies are endless. We have weapons that can crack planets. And yet you can't sleep at night, Daiho continued calmly. Because every day more human colonies refuse to kneel. Every battle more of your soldiers desert. Your own people are starting to ask why they follow you. He gestured to the holographic displays. Look at your fleet. Really look. Half those ships have skeleton crews because your soldiers won't fight anymore. The other half are running on emergency power because your supply lines are falling apart. You're not here to conquer Earth. You're here because it's the only move you have left. High Councillor Morth leaned forward, his voice like a rock slide. Even if that were true, we still have enough firepower to turn your precious Earth into space dust. One word from us and 10 billion humans die. Go ahead. The words hung in the air like a challenge. What? Morth blinked his massive eyes. Give the order, Daiho said. Destroy Earth, show the galaxy what the mighty Korvac Empire has become. Show them that you're so weak, so desperate, that your only victory comes from murdering civilians. Thy council members looked at each other. For the first time in their long lives, they hesitated. Do you know what happens when you destroy Earth? Daiho asked. Every human colony in the galaxy stops running and starts hunting. Every species you've oppressed sees that resistance works. Your own soldiers realize they're following cowards who can only win by killing children. He stepped closer to the thrones. But here's what really terrifies you. You know that even if you glass every human world, even if you kill every last one of us, the idea will survive. The idea that ordinary people can stand up to tyrants. The idea that freedom is worth dying for. Councillor Vrath's hands were shaking now. You're just one human, one weak, soft creature. That's right, Daiho smiled. I'm exactly what you were when you started. A child who got hurt, a child who got angry. The difference is, I learned that. My pain didn't give me the right to hurt others. You never learned that lesson. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of machinery. On the displays, the Korvac fleet waited for orders that weren't coming. 20 years ago, you thought breaking one human child would teach our species to fear you, Daiho said. Instead, you taught us that we were stronger than we knew. You created your own defeat the day you decided we weren't worth respecting. Hi. Councillor Vrath slowly stood from his throne. For a moment it seemed like he might attack. Then his massive frame sagged. What do you want? He whispered. Peace. Real peace. Your empire ends today, but your people don't have to. Help us build something better. Help us create a galaxy where no child, human, Korvac, or any other species has to suffer like you did. One by one, the High Council members rose from their thrones. Ancient beings who had ruled through fear now looked like what they really were, tired old creatures who had forgotten why they started fighting. The Korvac Empire surrenders, Vrath announced, his voice carrying to every ship in the fleet. Across the galaxy, weapons powered down. Prison camps opened their gates. Conquered worlds saw their first sunrise of freedom in centuries. From that moment, everything changed. The new Galactic Alliance wasn't built on conquest or fear. It was built on the simple human idea that everyone deserved a chance to choose their own path. And at its heart stood Kim Daiho, the child who refused to break, who had instead broken an empire with nothing but truth and courage.